Hi, today we're going to be having a little look at old documents from the church to see if there's any clues that may be there about Mary Magdalene. The early church left many documents behind, and not all of them have been fully studied yet. I strayed across a very obscure one indeed. This was the epistle of Ignatius to the Philippians, a very orthodox document. Out of a scale of 1 to 10 on orthodoxy, it's about a 12. It's about as orthodox as you're going to get. And I often look through these documents from time to time because I have a curiosity about the history of the early church, and I'm especially interested also in Mary Magdalene, who I believe was very active in the early church movement and out there preaching and teaching, forming groups, although this is not mentioned in the New Testament whatsoever and only strongly hinted at in the Gnostic Gospels. The particular text we're going to be looking at is probably written in the first few centuries AD. If it is a genuine letter of Ignatius, it would date to about 100 AD. That's questionable. I could find very little about this document on the internet whatsoever apart from the actual translation. So who knows when it was dated, but it was surely quite early and certainly represents it represents a very orthodox viewpoint. The text is curious. It is certainly written by a strong orthodox man. He is trying to describe how Satan was plotting to kill Jesus, and then when he realizes that Jesus is actually going to destroy him by sort of trying to kill Jesus, he thinks he's going to win, but actually by crucifying him and him being brought back to life, it marks his destruction. That's the point of view of this author. So he starts off by describing how Satan is using various people to get Jesus killed. Let's just read the first little bit of the extract. It says, and indeed before the cross was erected, he, Satan, was eager that it should be so, and he wrought for this end in the children of disobedience. He wrought in Judas, in the Pharisees, in the Sadducees, and in the priests. Okay, let's just examine that briefly. In Judas, obviously Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' disciples, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Judas left the scene very shortly after Jesus' passing. The Sadducees were pretty much wiped out when the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so basically what you have here is he is talking about the early days. He is talking about the 30 or 40, 50, 60s AD. To mention the Sadducees, they were wiped out when the temple was destroyed. And Judas certainly was a very early figure. So that immediately captured my interest. So I read on. But it was just about to be erected, i.e. the cross. He became troubled, that is Satan, and infused repentance into the traitor and pointed to him to a rope to hang himself, blah blah blah. In other words, he's trying to say that Satan suddenly realizes his mistake in trying to kill Jesus. Let's pass straight over this bit because this isn't really what I'm getting at. And the next line is the key. He terrified also the silly woman, disturbing her by dreams. And that line made me think, what does he mean by silly woman? That's all it says. There's no further clues. I think he may well have been referring to Mary Magdalene. Let me explain. All of those people he mentioned before, the priests, the Sadducees, the Pharisees and Judas, they all date very early, before 70 AD. That's the date that Mary would have been active. That's the same time frame. Also, disturbing her by dreams. If you're an Orthodox churchman trying to condemn other people, you are going to say something like that about their visions. If the people you're trying to condemn are having visions, you may well choose to use a word like dreams to try and put them down, to try and denigrate them. I mean, actually, it's kind of clear in this. I mean, especially if you read the rest of the work, how strongly he is against anyone that doesn't agree with him. You know, he's going to say that their visions are just silly dreams. I think, and he wouldn't mention it. He wouldn't just mention it if someone was having dreams, would he? It would have to have been someone that was having more than just dreams in the night, but actual visions, which they were then proclaiming out and as being a genuine vision. So I think this is what is being implied here. This is what he's basically saying, that this woman, right? This woman was having visions, and they were part of a preaching movement. And the fact that he calls her a silly woman, that makes me think also in the same respect as the dreams actually being visions. If someone had a reputation for being wise, to put them down you might call them silly, you know, and childish. But I think that is also possibly a play on the reputation that Mary had for being wise and being very learned and being the person that understood Jesus the most. I think, yeah, that caught my attention. That caught my attention. And if you actually read the Gospel of Mary, in it she has a vision. She has a vision of Jesus, and we can read it today in the Gospel of Mary. Is it possible that what the author of this work was referring to were Gospels like the Gospel of Mary, where a woman is having visions and is actively preaching them, and her own interpretation, not as part of the Orthodox Church movement necessarily. And the authors of these documents, these church official, these Orthodox documents, they didn't want anybody else doing what they were doing. They didn't have time for it. They wanted to be the only ones. So I think this is what is being implied here in this very small fragment. I think what is being implied, especially relating it back to to putting this woman in the same league as these other characters that were mentioned, not in terms of badness, maybe, but in terms of importance, in terms of having an importance. I mean, Judas was important. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were important in the story, in the tale, and I think he is including this woman in this tale. What you have here is a potential link. linking um, what must have been known in those far off days, that Mary was in fact a preacher. She was a teacher. She was out there forming her own movements, and she was effective enough to cause the later church fathers trouble in their attempts to consolidate power and to establish one single um, authority or authoritative voice. Therefore, to call her a silly woman, to call her visions dreams, in that context makes complete sense. And the Gospel of Mary was being circulated in those days. Um, None of the church fathers mention the Gospel of Mary at all. There's no mention. So unfortunately, we don't get to hear any of their views on whether Mary, in their view, did go out and teach and preach. There's silence on the issue. We got the hints in the Gnostic Gospels that, of course, she did. I believe she did. I think maybe this is. I think this is another little piece of the puzzle. It's a clue. Have a think about it. Read it for yourself and just see if you think this reference to a so-called silly woman having dreams is actually, in truth, a reference to a wise woman having visions. And in the time frame that we're talking about, 30 to 70 AD, that would be exactly the time frame that Mary would have been active in the early church. I think here we have a clue, and I think the whole fascination with Mary Magdalene is completely understandable, and the romantic side of it. Don't forget though that she would have had a message, she would have had an interpretation and an understanding, and she would have no doubt been very busy in the early church, forming groups and speaking her ideas about what it meant, what Jesus was trying to get at. And I don't think the Orthodox people at all got it right. And I'm not sure to what extent the various Gnostic groups did either. I think I'm always a believer in the third way, me. I tend to believe the Gnostic groups had it. In many ways, they were right on the ball. But you've got to look at all the sources. You've got to consider all the angles. And there's a mystery out there to be solved. What was it that Mary was trying to preach? What was her message? Was it more of a harmony, but somewhere between orthodoxy and sort of full-on Gnosticism? I think that is very likely. And at least now, maybe this little reference, this small reference, if you think about it, it does sort of link the little piece of information that we do have together, because all we have is these little pieces of information, and it's just another piece of the puzzle. That's all I'm getting at. That is the epistle of Ignatius to the Philippians.